Hello, grade 7. Our biology lesson for this week is about reproduction of flowering plants. Throughout this lesson, we are going to see what are the parts of the flower that play a role in reproduction. We are going to learn how do male and female gametes meet and what does this meeting lead to, and how does a flower transform into a fruit. Let me start our lesson by giving you a general idea about the organization of a flower. The calyx and the corolla form the floral envelope. The corolla is formed of a set of petals, while the calyx is formed of a set of sepals. The floral envelope attracts the pollinator insects and protects the fertile organs of the flower. Now, let us see what are the reproductive organs of the flower. The pistil and the stamen are the reproductive organs of the flower. The stamens are the male organs, while the flower and the pistil are the female organs. The stamens and pistil are the reproductive organs because they contain both male and female gametes. So in the first picture, we can observe a pistil, and in the second picture, we can observe a stamen. The pistil is made up of a bulged part, the ovary, a style, and a sticky stigma. The sticky substance at the tips of the stigma fixes the pollen grain. The stamen is made up of a filament and an anther containing pollen grains on its tip. The pollen grains produce the male gametes. Now, let us see how do pollination and fertilization occur in flowering plants. The fertilization of the flower is ensured by the deposit of pollen on the stigma of the pistil. Let's look at this experiment that shows the importance of pollination and try to analyze the results. The fruit and seeds are not formed when the stamens are cut, as we can see in experiment B, or when the cut stamens are replaced by pollen from another species, as we can see in experiment D. On the contrary, the fruit and seed form at the level of the flower protected by a thin gauze, experiment A, or when the stamens are cut and the pollen comes from another flower of the same species, as we can see in experiment C. So we can conclude that stamens and ovules are essential for the formation of fruits and seeds, and pollen must be of the same flower. We have to know that pollination is direct when the pollen is directly deposited on the stigma of the same flower, and pollination is indirect when the pollen is transported from one flower to another by insects, wind, or man. From pollination to fertilization. Let us look at the first document. We can see a saliva flower covered by pollen grains that stick on the stigma in picture number 1, and the beginning of its germination in picture number 2. In germination, the pollen grains emits a pollen tube that contains a vegetative nucleus and a reproductive nucleus, which is the male gamete. So in the picture, we can see the pollen tube that contains the reproductive nucleus and the vegetative nucleus. The pollen tube penetrates the ovule, so the male gamete fuses with the female gamete, and this process is called fertilization. And the result of fertilization is the egg cell that gives the seed and the ovary that gives the fruit. And I should mention that the reproduction in the flowering plants is sexual because it requires the intervention of male and female gametes. So now, if we look at this document, we can see the different steps of bean flower fertilization. So first, the pollen grain is transported to the stigma. It germinates and gives rise to a tube that penetrates into the style towards the ovules. This pollen tube leads the reproductive nucleus to the egg cell to be fertilized. And after fertilization, the development of the egg cell gives the seed and the ovary gives the fruit. From flower to fruit. After fertilization of the flower, the ovary changes into fruit which contains one or many seeds which germinate and give plants. After fertilization, many events take place. The ovary increases in size and transforms into a fruit. The sepals, petals, and stamens wither and fall down. In the dry fruits, the covering of the ovary will dry and open to liberate the seeds. So, what differentiates a dry fruit from a fleshy one? The dry fruit corresponds to the wall of the ovary, which dries and opens to release several seeds. The fleshy fruit corresponds to the wall of the ovary that develop into a fleshy mass that contains one or more seeds. So here in these pictures we can see the changes from flower to pea pod and then to dry fruit. In the first picture we can see pea fruits protruding from a flower. In the second picture we can see the seeds are visible in the translucent pod. And in the last picture we can see the opened fruits showing the seeds. Now, let us see how does a seed change to a plant. If we look at the first document on the left, we can see an entire bean seed with and without integument. And in the document on the right, we can see cotyledons rich in reserves. What is a cotyledon? A cotyledon is a fleshy mass full of food reserve. It contains nutritive reserves for the seed, and the nutritive reserves contained in the cotyledons are used for the nutrition of the seedling, it means of the embryo. Now, if we look at the third document, we can see a plant embryo of bean seed that lives on the reserves of the seed. Let us discover what is a plant embryo and what are the different structures of the young plant. A plant embryo is a small plant. The different structures of the plant embryo are a hypocotyl, a radicle, it means a small root, a growing point, and young leaves. Now, let us discover the different steps of germination. And I want to remind you that germination is the formation of a plant from a seed. And we are going to see the principal steps of a bean seed germination. Let's look at the document. On day 2, the seed swells, the integument is torn, the plant embryo appears and the radicle elongates. On day 5, the hypocotyl elongates, the radicle forms the roots. On day 6, the hypocotyl grows, the seed rises, and the integument falls down. On day 7, the hypocotyl grows, the terminal bud gives the stem and the 2 young leaves. On day 12, the hypocotyl grows, the leaves grow, and cotyledons wither. And finally, on day 15, a young plant without cotyledons rises. And now we are going to see a different way of multiplication of flowering plants. We are going to talk about the vegetative multiplication. And we are going to start with the vegetative multiplication from a tuber. And as an example, we are going to talk about the potato. The tuber is the vegetative organ that is at the origin of a potato plant. Some plants, like potatoes, reproduce by their various vegetative organs like stems, buds, or leaves. A bud is a small bulged organ capable of giving a new plant. We should know that the reproduction of the potato is a vegetative multiplication because it is formed through the buds that are on tuber and not by flowers that need the intervention of male and female gametes. So let's see what happens during this vegetative multiplication. The farmer cultivates potatoes by planting tuber fragments. The germinated fragment carries the embryo. It is a cut plant. Cutting is a technique which permits to obtain whole plants from fragments of a mother plant. The bud develops and forms a flowering plant with tuber. The plant withers and dies, and new tubers are harvested in summer. Now, let's see the vegetative multiplication from a stolon, and as an example here, we are going to talk about the strawberry. The strawberry extends naturally by a process called layering. What is layering? Layering is a natural or artificial technique which permits to multiply a plant by planting a part of the stem. The strawberry plant produces long stems called stolons which run at the surface of the soil. A young strawberry plant is formed along the stolons. When these plants have roots, the stolons die and the new plants become independent. And finally, here we have a comparative table between cuttings and layering. Cutting is an artificial technique performed by the man, but layering is a natural or artificial technique. Cutting can help us obtain a plant from a fragment of the mother plant, but layering can lead to obtaining a plant by burying a part of the stem. In cutting, the fragment may be a stem, a root, a bud, or a leaf. In layering, the fragment is a creeping stem called stolon. That's it for today, grade 7. Thank you for your attention.